Microsoft have released some game-changing functions recently I would have killed for back in my accounting days. They'll make your work easier, faster, maybe even a little bit more fun. It's hard to pick a favorite, and I'll tell you mine when we get to it. I'd love to hear which one clicks for you, so please leave a comment as you watch. Also, there's a handy practice file linked to in the video description, complete with examples and a cheat sheet. Feel free to grab it and follow along. As accountants, we often deal with data that updates each reporting period. The best way to reference that data so that it's automatically included in our analysis and reports is either with Power Query, or if it's already in the worksheet, format it in an Excel table so you can use the table's structured references and have them automatically include new data. By the way, if you're not familiar with Excel tables, there are links in the file download to a comprehensive lesson. The problem with tables arises if you're using some of the new dynamic array functions that spill because they return spill errors. And that's where the new TRIMRANGE function comes in super handy. TRIMRANGE automatically detects the cell range your data occupies and expands and contracts with it, so you no longer need to write dynamic named range formulas with offset and index. Here I have a typical list of sales by period. I need to find the total, the average, and for homework you can find the minimum. Obviously for the total I'm going to use sum, and then for the reference I'm going to wrap it in the TRIMRANGE function. Selecting my sales, and then I'll include some spare rows, allowing for new periods to be added. The next argument for TRIMRANGE allows me to specify trimming just leading, just trailing, or both for empty rows or columns. Now I only have one column selected, and the default is to trim both, so we're just going to end it at the range argument, close TRIMRANGE, close sum, and there's my result. And now if I paste in new data, my formula automatically includes it. Another way we can achieve this is with the new TRIMREF.operator. So this time we'll use the average function, and instead of using TRIMRANGE, I'm just going to go straight in and select the cells, including some spare ones, to allow for new data to be added. And then with the new TRIMREF.operator, a dot before the colon trims empty leading rows and or columns, and a dot after the colon operator trims trailing empty rows or columns. A dot either side is going to trim both. So I only need to trim trailing rows, so close parentheses on average, press enter, and it's done. And this is a much more succinct formula with no need for TRIMRANGE or dynamic named ranges with offset or index. By the way, I should point out that you can also reference whole rows and columns with TRIMRANGE and the TRIMREF.operator, which you can try out when you find the minimum for homework. As much as we shouldn't, it's still common to spread data across different tables or sheets in a file. And we can use Power Query to consolidate it, but sometimes the formula is better because we get instant results without having to refresh queries. Let's take a look at the VStack function, which lets us do that with ease. In its simplest form, VStack combines multiple arrays of the same number of columns. For example, here I can stack these two tables. I'm going to include the headers from the first table, and then comma, my second array are just the rows containing the data from the second table. Close parentheses on VStack, and it spills the results into a single table. And notice how it handles the different number of rows in each array without a problem. Now, I should point out that the formatting here doesn't come with VStack, which is why I'd formatted these cells in advance, so you can easily see where the data came from. A nice feature of VStack is you can also stack data spread across multiple sheets. For example, here I have data in separate sheets for each year, and notice that each table contains the same number of columns, but a different number of rows on the three separate sheets. Let's see how I can use VStack with a 3D reference to stack them all in one array. Equals VStack. I'm going to select the table on my first sheet, and remember I need to allow an extra row because 2024's table has 6 rows. Holding down Shift, I'm going to select the last sheet, and notice in the formula bar I have a 3D reference. Sheets 2023 through to 2025 and cells A1 to D6. Close parentheses on VStack and press enter. Now, because I've allowed for the table containing the largest number of rows in my range, it results in zeros being returned for the tables that don't contain data on rows 5 and 6. And notice I also have the column headers repeated for each table. One option we have to resolve this is, let's build it again. Select the first table, including the headers, That'll bring in the headers that we need, comma, and then we can select just the rows of data for the subsequent tables. And notice in the formula bar it's putting in the table name, close parentheses, and now we get a nicely stacked array of data. It's not quite as quick and easy to write, but it's a simple way to get around the zero issue where you have varying numbers of rows. In the deep dive lessons linked to here in the file download, I cover another way to handle zeros, as well as loads more example uses of VStack, and the sibling function HStack, which handles horizontal stacking, so be sure to check them out. The BIRO function fundamentally changes the way we write formulas that calculate down rows. It enables us to write a formula once and have it automatically applied to all rows in the range we specify, improving productivity and accuracy. For example, I can write BIRO here to return the average grades for each student in this table, and let's allow for more students to be added, and I'll use the trimref operator to trim trailing blank rows, comma. The next argument is the function, and I can either write my own custom lambda, or I can choose from the built-in eta lambdas here that cover common functions. Now I want to find the average, so I'm going to tab to insert it, close parentheses on BIRO, and it spills the results. Now the technical explanation for BIRO is it takes an array or range of rows that you want to iterate over. This array is then passed to your function, which is a lambda or an eta lambda, one row at a time for lambda to perform the calculation. And the easiest way to think about BIRO is simply any formula or function that you want to apply to one row and copy down can automatically be applied to multiple rows with BIRO. Now I allowed for more students to be added, so let's pop me in there. I was never great at science, better at art, and again chemistry, not my strength. And you can see BIRO automatically extends because we used the trimref operator when we referenced those spare rows. Now BIRO has a sibling function for columns called bicol, so check out the in-depth lesson linked to in the download file. Scan is one of the most interesting new functions, with its most common use case being to calculate cumulative or running totals, something we accountants do all the time. To calculate the running total with scan, you start with the initial value. Now, because I'm summing the values, I want to start with 0. The array is my list of values I want to calculate the running total for. And I'm going to allow for new data to be added, and we'll use the trimref operator to trim those empty trailing rows. And finally, we enter our function. This can be a lambda, or you can use the eta lambdas. The autocomplete list for eta lambdas isn't popping up, but you can just type it in. Close parentheses on scan. It spills my running total. And notice the formula ends where my data ends. But if I add new data, you can see it automatically updates because I've used the trimref operator. Next up is the filter function, which enables you to extract a subset of your data based on criteria you specify. You can think of it like a lookup that returns multiple matches. It can return a single column of data or multiple columns. For example, let's say I want to extract the sales department data from this table. Well, equals filter. The array, I want all of the columns returned, but if you only wanted one, you can just select the one you want returned. Comma, which rows do I want to include? Well, this is a logical test. I want the department that equals sales returned. And then my final argument is if filter returns no data, I can return something else. It can be text, another value, another formula. I'm just going to return no records. Now, if we just talk about this include argument, you can see it returns an array of Boolean true and false values. The first 6 rows return false and the last 3 return true. These true and false values tell filter which rows to return. All right, let's close parentheses on filter, and you can see it returns the last 3 rows, which are for the department sales. Filter is my favorite new function, and I've only covered the tip of the iceberg of what it can do. In the deep dive lesson, you'll see how you can filter with multiple criteria, handle all criteria, extract non-contiguous columns. You can also link it to data validation lists and use it as a filter with other functions to create cool tools like this one, where I can extract data from a bigger table and specify how I want it sorted with drop-down lists. So be sure to check out the lesson linked to in the Excel file. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying these Excel tips and you want a structured way to master even more advanced skills, my Excel Expert course could be exactly what you need. I've designed it so that you can learn at your own pace with unlimited 24/7 access. No pressure or rush. You'll get practical examples, downloadable practice files, and real-world exercises to boost your confidence. Plus, you'll receive direct personal support from me whenever you get stuck, and earn a professional certificate to enhance your CV. Thousands of my students have already transformed their Excel skills. If you'd like to join them, click the link in the description or pinned comment and start your journey today. Okay, pivot tables are a game changer for quickly summarizing data, but their downfall is they don't update automatically. Group by and pivot by solve that problem. You can think of the group by function as a pivot table like this that doesn't have any fields in the columns area. Let's recreate this with the group by function. So equals group by. The first argument is the fields I want in my rows. I'm grouping by country, and I'm going to include the column headers, comma. The next argument are the values that I want aggregated. I want the units sold, including the column headers. The next argument is how I want to aggregate those units sold. And you can see we can choose from these built-in functions here. I'm going to sum them, so let's tab to insert it. Then I can specify whether there are headers in my fields and choose whether to include them or not. I have headers and I want to show them, so that's 3. And then we've got some more optional arguments for how totals are displayed, sorting and filtering. But as they're optional, and I have everything I need to recreate this pivot table here already entered in my formula, I'm just going to close parentheses. And just like that, we've got a pivot table generated with a formula. And if I change a value here, let's make this quite significant so we can see it. You'll notice the group by generated pivot table update, whereas this one here remains static. With group by, you can also return multiple columns, multiple non-contiguous columns, multiple value columns. You can see here we've got units sold and sales. We can also specify sorting and filtering. So be sure to check out the deep dive lessons linked to in the file download. Pivot by is essentially the same as group by, except it has additional arguments for the column field. For example, let's recreate this pivot table that has the segment and country in the row labels and the product across the columns, and we're summing sales. I'll close the field list, and here we're going to equals pivot by. The first argument are the row fields. I want to group the segment, including the header, and the country columns. The next argument are the column fields. We've got the products across the columns, so I'll select that field, including the headers. And then for the values, we're summing the sales. So the function is sum. And then I need to choose whether I have field headers and do I want to show them. So I'm going to go yes and show, which is 3. And next I can choose whether to include grand totals and subtotals. I want both, so that's 2. And then we have some further optional arguments for sorting, column total depth, column sort order, and so on. But I've got enough with this formula so far to recreate this pivot table. So let's close parentheses. And now we have a pivot table created by a formula. Pretty cool. But what about the formatting? Well, you can use conditional formatting to automatically format total rows and columns and have it dynamically update with the results of the formula. We can also link these formulas to slices, so be sure to check out the deep dive lesson. XLOOKUP replaces the VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and index and match functions. Plus, it has built-in error handling. If you're not already using it, you are missing out. Let's say I want to look up this product here, caps. Where am I looking it up? In the product column. And I want to return sales. One of the nice things about XLOOKUP is I can handle errors inside the formula. So if the product's not found, I can return a number, text, or another formula. Let's just say missing if it's not found. The next argument is the match mode, and by default it's an exact match, so I can skip it. And the other optional argument is the search mode, which by default is first to last. I'm happy with the defaults here for these arguments, so let's close parentheses on XLOOKUP, and it returns the result. So you can see it's super straightforward to use, and I'd say easier than VLOOKUP. XLOOKUP can also look up horizontal arrays. For example, let's look up October's sales. The lookup array is this row here. The return array are the sales underneath. I'm not concerned about it not being found, so let's close parentheses there, and that's my result. It's super easy. However, you do need to be mindful that the lookup array and the return array must be the same size, whether that's in a horizontal lookup or like we did up here with the vertical lookup. You can see the lookup array and return array are the same height. XLOOKUP can also return multiple columns or rows. It can return values to the left of the lookup column, which overcomes that issue with VLOOKUP. It can also do an approximate match, look up the last value, and it can do two-way lookups like index and match. So be sure to check out the deep dive lesson where I cover these examples. The let function allows you to create more efficient formulas that are also easier to write and understand when you revisit them months later and wonder what you were thinking. The syntax is straightforward, consisting of name and value pairs, and then a calculation. If we take an easy example, let, I'll name the first variable x, and we'll give it the value 5, and then my next variable will be y, which I'll give the value 10. And then my calculation will simply be x plus y. Notice as I type in the variable names, they appear in the IntelliSense, making it super easy to write these let formulas. Close parentheses on let, and you can see it returns 15, which is 5 plus 10, or x plus y. Now you can add more name and value pairs as required, but you'll always have an odd number of arguments. That is the even number of name and value pairs plus your single calculation argument. Another thing to note is the value arguments in this example are numbers, but you can also use text, formulas or expressions, arrays, cell references, Boolean values, or defined names. Let's take a look at another example. One of the main reasons for using let is to improve calc efficiency. For example, here I've calculated a forecast for sales for the next period. I have a simple rule where if the total sales are greater than 100, then it's going to return the sales plus 5%, otherwise it'll return the sales less 3%. In this if formula, Excel will perform the sum at least twice, once in the logical test, and then once if the value is true or false. But with let, we can halve the work for Excel by declaring the sum formula as a variable. I'm going to go up into my formula bar and write this formula. We'll give ourselves a bit more space. I'll Alt-Enter onto the next line, and we'll name our first variable, which is sales current year, or CY. Alt-Enter to go onto the next line, and this is where I define my variable, which is the sum of my sales. Close parentheses, comma, Alt-Enter. Now I can write my if formula. That is, if sales current year, and notice it's there in the IntelliSense, let's tab to insert it, is greater than 100, then, and I'll Alt-Enter for my value if true, then I'll take the sales current year, tab to insert it, times 1.05, comma, Alt-Enter, otherwise I'll take the sales current year times 0.97. Close parentheses on if, and then close let. Press enter, and we get the same result. Now my formula is easier to read, and because it only calculates the sum once at the beginning of the formula, it's more efficient. Of course, the efficiency gain here is negligible, but when you have thousands of formulas that repeat calculations, you can imagine the gains are substantial. Check out the deep dive lesson for more advanced uses of let, as well as tips on debugging long formulas. As accountants, our lives revolve around dates, whether they're reporting periods or deadlines. So it's super handy that we can now auto-generate a list of dates at whatever interval we need. Two of the most common are start of month and end of month dates. For the start of each month, we can use the date function. I want the months of 2025, and then in the month argument, we can use the sequence function for the number of months we want returned. I want 12 months. And I want the first of each month. Close parentheses, and we get a spilled array for the first date of each month. And of course, if you want a different day returned, say the 15th, then you can just change it in the date argument and it flows through. Let's go back to the first of each month, because there's another trick. What if you want 2 years worth of dates? Well, instead of 12, enter 24. And now we've got 2 years worth of month start dates. Now you might wonder why this formula doesn't repeat the dates for January to December 2025 again. And that's because Excel's date function month argument can go beyond 12. And when it does, it automatically rolls over to the correct month and year. So date 2025, month 13, day 1, returns Jan 1st, 2026, and so on. And that's why we get 24 unique months from January 2025 through to December 2026. Clever, huh? Now for the last date in each month, I'm going to Control R just to copy that formula across. And then we're going to wrap the date function in the end of month function. The start date is going to be my list of start dates returned by the date function. And then in the months argument, I simply tell it how many months I want to increment. Now I just want to return the last day of each month that the date function returns. So I'm going to enter 0 here so that it doesn't increment them. Close parentheses on EO month, press enter, and now I have month end dates. Of course, you can also link these formulas to cells and other formulas, making them dynamic. So instead of using the date function here to calculate the start date, you might reference some other cells that have your date data, making them even more dynamic. While formulas and functions are great, as finance professionals, you should also be a master of pivot tables. However, if like me, you found they have some limitations, check out this video next on the Excel tool that does what pivot tables can't. You'll never look back. Click over and I'll see you there.